welcome back to Rushing the Field, live from the Combine. I'm Nicole Auerbach, joined by Connor Rogers, a draft guru for NBC Sports.
Yeah.
So we are going to talk about the college guys. We're going to talk about their next steps and go through your big board, mock drafts, all of the above. Very excited to have you here. I guess the first thought I have, Connor, first of all, this is like my first time doing all this.
Okay. It's a lot. It'll become even more crazy in about 24 hours.
Well, so like, are we going to be like sizing guys up? We're going to be like, oh, he's bigger than I thought he was.
The whole, everything.
Like everything, just all looks.
Yeah,
thrown
like,
against
that's
air.
what a 350-pound defensive tackle that'll run a 4.8 will look like when they walk by you.
I feel like that will be the most jarring part.
It always is.
Because you're like, okay, you see the numbers, you watch on TV, and then you look at the physical specimens, and you're like, how did someone this big run that fast?
Move like that, or just the presence alone. Because you think about it, there are also wide receivers or running backs that are built somewhat like normal people that have to get away from these guys and what tackling, getting tackled by them would feel like. So the Combine it checks every box. Like every coach and GM will be here today speaking, and then you get all the players across 4 days, not just the workouts, but you get to hear all of them speak as well, kind of see what they're made of. So it's really like the mecca of the NFL offseason.
Yeah, it feels that way. And we were catching up with friends last night, and someone compared it to like a class reunion. Also feels that way from a media standpoint.
Yeah.
So we're going to dive into all of that. We're also going to have more interviews on the Rushing the Field feed later this week from Indianapolis. I want to talk about the draft big picture before we dive into your individual takes and analysis. I've heard multiple people say it's like kind of a meat and potatoes draft because, maybe we're not talking about the quarterbacks like we did last year. And maybe there's even more debates about, the order of 1, 2, 3 than usual, where you kind of say, oh, the draft usually starts at 4 or 5 or whatever it is. Do you view it that way? Meat and potatoes, like offensive line, defensive line, like the guys that actually hold these teams together?
I do, but that doesn't – I think some people look at that and think like, oh, it's bland then. And it makes me laugh a little bit because the team –
I love meat and potatoes.
Meat and potatoes is great for football. Meat and potatoes is great in real life.
Yeah.
So it's funny to me because the team that just won in a blowout in the Super Bowl, their season was really built on running the football and the defensive line. Like that was the identity of the Philadelphia Eagles. And then everybody looks at this draft and they're like, okay, where are the strengths? The defensive line, the running back group, and I actually think the offensive line group is deeper than people realize. And tight end is really, really good, which is such a huge part of running the ball in the NFL as well. So it's funny. I think some people are using that to classify this as like, oh, it's a boring draft. It doesn't have stars, but it has what helps teams actually win football games across multiple units.
Yeah, I feel like it's because, again, you don't have a bunch of quarterbacks. You're not going to see a bunch of quarterbacks drafted like last year. And I would say the receivers, not as flashy either.
I agree.
Like, I'm with you on the tight ends. I want to get your thoughts on the running backs as well. But that's part of what it feels like. It feels like there's a bunch of edge guys that are going to go in the first round, like linemen. Questions for the offensive linemen, and we're going to get into some of them, are like, can they stay at tackle? Are they going to be an offensive line? So that's where measurements actually come into play, right? Because people are going to want to see their wingspan.
So most teams by now have thresholds, right? So, and it doesn't mean if a guy doesn't meet a threshold, he's off the board, he's undraftable. It might mean that you can kind of dock him on your grade, or, hey, our position coach typically, one for example, usually like your NFL tackles to have 34-inch arms, right? And it can range, but you just run the metrics across the NFL, say the last 20 years of guys that have, success rate or guys that have not worked out. And there's a lot. If you're a corner and you run a 4.6, good chance that it's just not going to work out for you. Or there are outliers, like look at Kamari Lassiter from last year who had a really good rookie season. Yeah, there's outliers, but typically you're trying to play the odds, right? Yeah. You can compare it to betting, whatever you want it. Like there's odds at this that are analytically, that match the analytics. So that's a really good one, is arm length for tackles and arm length for defensive linemen, because it's how you can kind of counter off of blocks, how you can use your length to win. So yeah, NFL teams, they have real thresholds, and some guy like Will Campbell's a great player, right? And he is somebody that had a great career at LSU. I think he's the best offensive lineman in the draft, but realistically, he's going to come in with shorter arms at this event, and all the combo around a great football player.
Is how long his...
Can he play tackle because of his arm length? And that'll be split for NFL teams, and that... I don't think it'll dictate how high he goes, but you remember Peter Skoronski from a couple years ago.
Right.
That was a similar conversation. He was probably a no-brainer top 10 player in the draft. He falls a little bit and goes to guard right away, even though he was a great college tackle.
Right, and you'd feel better about using an early pick on a tackle, right?
Always, yeah.
Like way more Or not way more, but more valuable.
Without a doubt. It also goes by, you just look at the markets in the NFL based on finances, right? What are the position groups that get paid an enormous amount of money? Take away quarterback because that's in a stratosphere of its own, but the wide receiver market has exploded. The offensive tackle market has exploded. And pass rushers, that market is gigantic. So you look at things and go, okay, well, am I going to take a great guard in the top 15 of this draft? Maybe. You will. That conversation will be around a guy like Tyler Booker from Alabama. But I can go out and maybe sign a starter for $9 million in the NFL instead. And realistically, the positions I named before, Nicole, quarterback, wide receiver a little bit, but not too much, especially tackle, they don't make it to free agency. Right. So it's find your own, right? It was a really interesting quote not that long ago from Duke Tobin of the Bengals when people asked him about T. Higgins potentially getting to free agency, and he said teams can go find their own wide receivers, right? So teams don't want to let these guys go. They want to extend them. So if there's no supply in the free agent market, you better be here and find them in the draft, or else you're in big trouble.
It's completely. And this is something that's so different with college when you just like have a bad offensive line or don't have tackles, can't protect the quarterback, you can't do anything about it, right? Because you don't have a draft. You don't have free agency.
Wait till the national signing day in the portal.
Now, so you're kind of stuck for the season.
Yep.
Okay, so let's talk about the best player, the best athlete, your number one on your big board.
Travis Hunter. Yeah.
Okay, so you're talking about cornerbacks and like the speed that they're going to need to see, the talent, the market for a great corner. Were you surprised that he came into the combine only listed as a defensive back?
Not too much, because I think at the end of the day that I would have been really surprised if they, were able to put him in both groups. I think he's pretty adamant about playing on both sides of the ball at the NFL level. Now, what that looks like from a sports science perspective from an NFL team is going to be a different conversation. They're going to have a staff that looks at it and goes, hey, we know you could play over 100 snaps at the college level, but over a long period of time at the NFL level, we don't know if the human body could do that. And Travis has the confidence that he feels like he could be successful on both sides. I think he can. I mean, just ranking him individually, there's an argument to be made. He's the number one corner in this draft. There's no questions about that. But you can make the argument that he'd also be the number one wide receiver. And as you see, he's the number one overall player for me. I know a lot of people like Abdul Carter, number one overall. I still think Hunter, the way he impacts the game is incredible. My best guess, Nicole, and a lot of people are gravitating towards this way, he'll be drafted as a number one corner in the NFL. There'll be a package of plays for him at wide receiver.
That's what I would do.
It's the thing that allows him to do both while still managing his body and protecting him, but he also can still impact the game tremendously on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and it feels like that's the easier way to do it. Like, you can't take someone who's like in all of the offensive meetings and receiver stuff and then throw in a complicated defensive game plan.
Hey, go cover Jamar Chase because we're in the red zone. Like, that doesn't it doesn't work that way.
Right. And so I'm with you. It was interesting. I was on PFT earlier, and Florio's take was, what if someone drafts him and is just like, no. Like, this is how we're doing, because this is the system we're in, right? Like, you can say in an era of player empowerment, here's what I want.
Sure.
And you could even have Deion Sanders pressuring from the outside. You'd be an idiot not to have him as a receiver, at least in packages. But a team could still say no.
Of course. At the end of the day, they're telling what guys go in and what guys come out, right? That's the reality. And I think that's why these conversations here, I always say the NFL Combine, people love the event. It's great for the media like us that, you watch the testing on TV. You get all these interviews with players. All those things are great. The most important aspect of the NFL Combine is what you don't see on television. It is the medicals, and it is when teams meet with these guys. And you'll have a good feel from the guy of what he's open to, what his desires are. And I think a team will find Travis Hunter, figure it out and find a way to kind of get together on it. The interesting argument is if he's a wide receiver full-time, that market is more expensive drastically than the cornerback market. If he really does play both ways, we don't know what that market is. It's a unicorn. Is he going to be paid like a quarterback? Is there a world where, hey, you're a $50 million player now? So I think that's part of it as well. But I think at the end of the day, he's going to probably stand his ground and want to do both. And I just think you really highlighted this point. You can be a full-time corner and you can impact the game as a wide receiver. I don't know if you could be a full-time wide receiver and get into the rhythm of being a corner. Right. There's so much and credit to him for doing it at college, which is unbelievable in the Big 12.
But still, their offense was like, shooter, scramble enough, and throw to one of your receivers, right? Like, it was a different level.
And at the NFL level on defense, you're going to be in meetings all week where, hey, when they're in this look, we're playing quarters. Or, hey, on third downs, third and longs, when we bring our pressure, you're in man. Or, like, you need to check to this. Or is your team playing sides? Are you going to ask him to play on an island and travel with the top wide receiver? You can't do that if you're a part-time corner, which is probably his best ability, I think, is playing in man coverage and matching guys' movements. I'd want to draft Travis Hunter and be like, hey, can you wipe out the number one wide
Right,
receiver on
right.
the other team for
Well,
the entire game?
So isn't that why when you're looking at this logically, again, out of just like the logistics of, okay, of course you can prepare better if you're full-time defense, but also isn't that why you're kind of more valuable? I mean, yes, receivers get paid, but there are a number of great receivers.
Right.
Like, I feel like being an elite corner is still, like, for him, the better path here.
I think it is. I think it's better for the teams, for sure. And I think it's not. There's not a world where, the money is that drastically different. Because you also have to look at the ceiling. I think his ceiling as a corner is he could be the best corner in football.
Yes.
Like, that's pretty attainable for somebody of his athleticism. At wide receiver, I think he's a really good wide receiver. I don't think there's a world where he'd be the best wide receiver in football. Like, I don't see him as a Jamar Chase level prospect. Even last year, Malik Neighbors and Marvin Harrison Jr.
Yeah, he's also a little smaller than some of the
He's very
other-
slender. He has a similar build and movement to Garrett Wilson, who's a tremendous NFL wide receiver. But nobody looks around and says he's the best wide receiver, right? So that's another conversation. And the corner market's going to get better, right? Sauce Gardner is going to get paid, and the market will move up, and other guys will continue to get paid. So by the time, if he gets drafted, he plays corner, and he ultimately, in 3 years, because that's when you're eligible for an NFL extension, is up, I mean, he could really break the bank and move that market to a place
especially
we
if he
haven't
is
seen.
playing a little bit of receiver, right? And
Playing a
it's
little
like
bit of
it's a
receiver.
unique-
So it's going to be a sweetener. Say the top corner, when he's due to get paid, is paid $30 million a year. It's like, okay, you're the best corner.
plus.
And you also help at wide receiver, and you travel with other teams' number one wide receivers. Maybe you're now a $38 million a year corner.
Yeah.
You move the market $8 million. That doesn't happen at positions in the NFL, but it can happen for someone like him.
For sure. Let's talk about the quarterbacks, though, because part of the reason that Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter might not go number one is if you need a quarterback, there's two guys, right? And it feels like the consensus is starting to form that it's Cam Ward, then Shedeur Sanders. That's how you have it. You have Cam Ward number one in your mock draft. So walk me through your evaluation of those two guys and the order.
Cam's been fascinating to watch because this is somebody that really wasn't a recruit. He goes to Incarnate Ward. He's the best player at that level. He transfers up. At Washington State, he was kind of a wild man. One of the most fun players to watch in college
football.
football.
He was still that at Miami, by the way.
And he carried that to Miami, but I will say, and it was a small amount, but the big big throw percentage, NFL level throws that you grade out, that percentage went up. And the turnover-worthy play percentage did go down. Now, was it to the level that you'd want for an NFL prospect? Maybe not yet, but the trajectory is on the right pathway, right? He's not like one of these guys like Caleb Williams, I thought was better 2 years before his draft year.
Yeah.
Right? For Cam has always gotten better throughout the course of the year. NFL teams now, the more I talk to them, they are gravitating towards guys that have played a ton of college football. They're so scared of these one-year wonders, or they realize that the one-year wonders really need to sit for a year, and that's hard to sell to ownership.
Right, especially if you're taking with a really high pick.
As you take a guy number one and you go, hey, we'll play it 2 years from now. It's just not that world doesn't exist, right? So for Cam Ward, you're not drafting him and sitting him. Like the development, he has played so much college football, and yes, you need to.
I kind of love this trend though. Because,
me too. I think it's great for the players.
I agree. And, they're actually super experienced. Like, Michael Penix Jr.
Perfect call out.
Everyone was like, he's so old. I was like, yeah, but he's played so much football.
Played a lot of college football.
Have you watched him?
Two, multiple injuries, but torn knees. Like, there was a lot going on there. It's funny when you talk about age and context. There's a bad narrative in the draft world of this guy's a 24-year-old prospect.
Makes us feel a little bit old.
You can't take him. Yeah, right? Oh, so old at 24. What we would do. And then you look at it and go, well, did you know this, and this about his college career? Or he transferred here and he broke out here. Like that, then that age doesn't matter. It's not like he's 25, now he's dominating at the FCS level. That's a different conversation. So, yeah, I think Cam, he's got a big arm, really well built. He's not the tallest guy, but tall enough. But he's thick where when he does run a little bit, he can take hits if he needs to. His best ability, though, is extending plays. There's a difference between runners and scramblers. Cam is a scrambler. He likes to extend the play, keep his eyes downfield, make special throws, different arm angles.
Really, all of his highlights are that.
Right.
Kind of like
which
keeping
is
the play alive.
Good and bad.
Yeah.
Right? There's times where you want him, and I think he did a better job of this in Miami. Settle into the offense when your first two reads aren't there. Do you know where your outlet is? And just let the ball check the ball down and live to die another day is what they like to say. He got better at that. It's still a thing with him where, oh man, Cam Ward's been running around 8 seconds. He cut the fumbles down. Fumbles at Washington State were a massive issue. And that's what happens when you're just running around, obviously.
And it was also just him, right?
Yeah, you're trying to be Superman.
Yeah.
And when you're at that program, maybe you felt like I have to be if we're going to win the game. I think Caleb had that issue his last year at USC. It's like, if I don't put up 40 points today, we're not going to even be in the game.
And there was a little bit of that at Miami. Again, like you're saying, he kind of addressed his weaknesses. But, they didn't have a defense either. So he
Oh, it was
also was
insane.
scoring a lot. And
Yeah.
they would have been in the playoff if they had just a half decent
Like
defense.
mediocre
Yeah,
defense
yeah,
gets them there.
mediocre.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, because of like what you said about him addressing his deficiencies. He did declare for the draft last year, and then quickly was like, actually, no.
Right.
And then it was back to the college sweepstakes. But I remember thinking, yeah, like look at next year's draft class, like the quarterbacks, and now he has an opportunity to be QB1. So let's talk about Shedeur Sanders. Why right now you have him as your second quarterback off the board and not number one?
Physically, he's just not in the same tier as Cam Ward, whether it's arm strength, size. I think Cam's a little bit better of a runner. Shadeur's just not a runner, right?
Yeah.
He's another guy. He can scramble a little bit and reset the pocket, but he's not somebody that you're looking like, hey, can you give us 50 rushing yards today and we can script some plays for you?
He was more just staying alive behind that offensive line.
Right, and I think he developed some bad habits of holding the ball at times and trying to make the big play all the time, and the offensive line wasn't built to give him that kind of time. So the sack percentage, like that needs to go down. You can't take that many sacks. And people will be like, well, the offense, it's not always the offensive line. There's times where whether you're seeing pressure pre-snap or he just took way too many sacks. So that's going to be a big thing for him. I don't think he's ever going to be the most physically imposing guy on the field when you look at some of these quarterbacks that whether it is they're running or throwing, and it's not just the aliens like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Like that's not fair. But you look at the arm strength. In terms of average arm strength in the NFL, I think Shedeur would maybe be slightly below average arm strength, so that's going to play into it as well. I did think he got better throwing outside the numbers this year. That was something when I watched him over summer, I said, man, there's not a lot of throws down the field outside the numbers or intermediate outside the numbers. That was something that got better this year. So he's going to be a first-round pick. I still think he goes in the top 10. It's just a matter of Shedeur will kind of beat you more so with his mind and how he sees the field, and he's accurate. Like that's a great
accurate
aspect for a quarterback when you're accurate like that. But I think you get more upside with Cam, and teams in the NFL, they chase upside at the most important position.
Anytime I would tweet about Shedeur, Colorado, I would get Texas Tech head coach Joey McGuire in my DMs being like, he'd be my top pick. He'd be my top quarterback. Like, he just was so impressed with him and preparing for him when they would play him and watch him in Big 12 play. I want to move through a couple other position groups. Let's start with the tight ends. You brought them up right off the top.
Yep.
I love the tight ends. I love both of them. They were in the Big Ten. We saw them a lot this year, and that's Colston, Loveland at Michigan, and then Tyler Warren at Penn State. And Tyler Warren did like a little bit of everything. He took snaps.
It's crazy.
Like all sorts of
It's a
positions.
wildcat quarterback.
Yeah, he was a wildcat
Yeah.
quarterback. They lined him up on the offensive line. Like there was a lot going on. So, first of all, how good are these tight ends? How well are they going to project at the next level? And then what order do you have them?
They're tremendous. Now, are they Brock Bowers? No, I don't think anybody will be Brock Bowers for a very, very long time. But I have Tyler Warren as the top tight end in this draft. I think he's a top 10 player. Colston Loveland as the second tight end in this draft. I think he's a top 20 player and maybe more skewing towards a top 15 player and just kind of different types of players, right? Warren's interesting. He played some quarterback in high school. That's why you see him run that Wildcat package at Penn State. He's 260-plus pounds. He's a really good inline and flex kind of player where you could play him in the slot. I like him inline because I think he's a strong blocker.
Yeah.
He can move people as a dry blocker in the run game. You watch the Illinois tape. I mean, he destroys some people off the ball in the end zone there, and that's like, oh, okay, so now I have a sixth offensive lineman that can get vertical up the seam and catch the ball over. He's too fast for linebackers, but he can climb the ladder on a safety. That's the guys that make a big difference at the NFL level. You look at Loveland, a little bit different of a player, probably closer to what Dalton Kincaid was coming out of college, where he's a really good route runner. He's so gifted at when the play breaks down, drifting with his quarterback, maybe some of the best hands in the draft. Like I would say best hands in the draft, Loveland and Jack Besh from TCU, wide receiver. Like those guys, they just catch everything that comes their way. Loveland is somebody that I think is big enough to play on the line of scrimmage, but you don't want him doing that full time. You kind of like him as that power slot, where Warren, I think, will be a top 10 pick because if you can play multiple, right, you can line up and you can have the tight end on the field and you look at it and go, okay, we can run the ball basically with a sixth offensive lineman, but we can run play action and have him get over the top vertically. That changes the entire identity of your offense. The Detroit Lions are really good at that. The Philadelphia Eagles are really good at that. So I think Warren will be valued at an incredibly high level in this draft.
So let's talk a little bit about something the Lions did last year. Their draft in the moment was like criticized, right? Of like, oh my gosh, they took a running back, Jahmyr Gibbs, so early. I would take Ashton Genty very early.
Me too.
I think he is that special running back. And I'm curious your read on like the value of running backs, because there was a line of thinking for a very long time of you don't need to use a first round pick on a running back. We've seen it like Bijan Robinson, Jahmyr Gibbs. Like there have been guys that are able to do it. But like this NFL has also shown us this season that having a difference maker running back is different than just running run of the mill running back. So are they going to value Ashton Genty the way that he should?
I think so. And honestly, I think so much so that Amarian Hampton will be drafted in the first round as well.
Oh, really?
UNC.
Okay.
I think it's kind of
Do you
gone
think him
full
over
circle.
Caleb Johnson as the second?
It's close,
Okay.
and I think he's the clear-cut number 2, but I think Caleb is closer to that pack than the other way, where people are like, "Oh, Caleb Johnson, is he a top 50 guy?" Like, I think he's a top 35 guy in this draft. So, listen, Genty. It's the identity of your offense, right? The running back. If you have a good one, like when you think of the Philadelphia Eagles, what do you think of? Saquon Barkley,
Exactly.
right? And when you think of the Lions, you think of both of their running backs. It's not just the guy like Saquon. And I think the Falcons this year will be Bijan. Like, people will look at him a lot differently. So when you look at Genty, he has the best balance I think I've ever seen for a running back prospect. The way people fall off of him, and he's talked about this. He said, when I was younger, knowing the size of, I think, his dad, he's like, I knew I was never going to be the biggest, most physically imposing. I wasn't going to be 6'2". He started lifting weights at a really young age. He got really strong. Really interesting guy. He played football overseas,
lived
a
in
lot of
Italy.
different places. Then he came back to play at a higher level at Texas. So he's always been insanely strong since he was a young player. And that balance, you watch him against Oregon, like 340-pound Derek Harmon is bouncing off.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's what was crazy about him, and all. Like, my favorite stat for him was his yards after contact was better than teams had as rushing yards last year because of that. Because everyone knew that they were going to stop him, right? Like how many 8-man boxes he was up against and things. And he's still, by the the second half of games, was barreling through guys and was getting his yards. I would take. How high could he go?
Well, it feels like he can't get past the Cowboys at 12. You would
Okay.
think that feels like the absolute draft floor. I mean, when you look around at the teams in front of him, like, there's no reason he doesn't go in the top 10, right? Would it shock me if at 10 the Bears look at their situation and go, "Hey, we didn't love how the DeAndre Swift signing worked out. We have some young backs on the roster, but nobody like this guy. We need to get things right for Caleb and actually threaten our run game to help our young quarterback." I wouldn't be shocked at all if the Bears took him at 10. And I think things are so quiet on him right now because it wouldn't shock me, too, if teams are just – I think he's the third best player in the draft, right?
Yeah.
Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, and that's factoring in positional value.
Yeah.
So
Well, I also think he's going to impress people here. He's just like a lovely person.
phenomenal human.
And when you're thinking of face of an organization, face of a franchise, and again, not the running back has to be the only face, but like in a Saquon, Jalen Hurts way, where like these guys all represent the Eagles when you think of them.
Yep.
I think Ashton Genty can be that guy. Like, he was a fantastic representative for Boise State. We learned so much about him this season, the way he went through the Heisman. I mean, one of the images that stuck out to me was everyone showing up for their Heisman like day in New York, and he's in Boise State gear because he's just a walking advertisement for the program that he didn't leave. He didn't choose to go for a bigger NIL payday and stayed there, took him to the playoff, and became a finalist. Like, I love the Ashton Genty story. So I'm really fascinated in the running backs. We haven't talked about the defensive guys, or at least the edge guys, which it feels like to me from the outside, and I'm curious your thoughts because you are the expert. Is that the strongest group?
I think the defensive line as a whole, right? If you factor in interior defensive line, you can make the argument just the depth of it in the top 50 of this draft. Like, we're going to see so many names go.
Oh, the Michigan guys I love.
The Michigan guys are both first-rounders in Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Walter Nolan from Ole Miss just had a tremendous – he put it all together, like former number 1 overall recruit, and you're kind of waiting, like, when is this guy going to take over? He took over this year. He was absolutely lights out. Texas A&M has 3 guys that are going to go, in my opinion, in the top 60 of the draft. Like, Nick Scorton, we know, is going to go in the first round. Shamar Stewart might go in the top 12 of this draft.
And it's crazy. His path is so interesting because the numbers, like if you're like
1.5 sacks every year, every single year.
Yeah, and you're like, but he's the guy, right? Yep. Like, because you just can project it out and you see the pressures that he gets.
What he does too, like, you turn on the film, I've never seen somebody on the defensive line like that get to the sideline that fast, and it's partially the height, partially because he's probably going to run a 4.5 here at 280 plus pounds. I mean, we're talking about like unseen territory with him athletically, and there's so many glimpses of it on film. I mean, and the list goes. You brought up the edge class. Abdul Carter might be the number 1 overall pick in the draft. I think Mike Green goes in the top 12 from Marshall. And then we talked about Nick with Texas A&M because he's more of an edge player. But James Pierce might go in the first round. That's kind of up in the air right now. And then you have all these round 2 guys like JT Tuimoloau from Ohio State. He's just a pro. Like, he's ready to go, hand in the dirt, strong hands, set the edge against the run. Really good instincts in the pass game, like gets his hands up in passing lanes. You're right. I think it's the deepest group in this draft by far.
It also feels like it's such a valuable position in the way that really all of football is played, but especially the NFL right now.
You got to be able to get after the quarterback.
Yeah. Is there a weak class or weak position group?
Yeah, we talked about how thin quarterback is, but I think that's too easy of an answer. That's a good question. I think linebacker, is really up in the air because everybody looks at Jalen Walker from Georgia. I don't think he's a linebacker. I think he's a pass rusher.
Yeah.
But he played linebacker. So if you
Well, this is why, like, I'm glad at least people are labeling guys as edge because,
Yeah.
like, they used to be like linebacker.
It's the worst thing ever.
It was very confusing.
Yeah, it's like, well, does that guy play off the ball? Does he play with his hand in the dirt? And
Yes.
you're not getting that from a list.
Yeah.
So if you sit here and go Jalen Walker, who will be a probably top 15 pick, if you sit here and go he's more of an edge player, the linebacker group has good players, but it doesn't have that, that guy. I think like Jod Campbell's another one from Alabama. He's a really good player. He might rush the passer at the NFL level on top of playing off the ball because he's still developing. He's more athlete than instincts right now, which is how it goes for a young player. And then you have a lot of different names like Barrett Carter, who played a lot of, obviously a lot of football. Danny Stutzman from Oklahoma. Like you have this long list of names. So I think linebacker is not a bad group, but a little thinner at the top than we're accustomed to seeing. I think guard is solid, but, outside of Booker and how you project you brought up a key point. Like the tackles, are they all going to kick inside the guard? Because then guard's the best group.
Right.
But if they all stay at tackle, then guard's a little thin.
Is that something that you'll be able to pick up, like, coming out of this? Like, you'll see how people are evaluating them based on their measurements and how they test?
Yeah, so you get a good idea. Like, arm length helps. You talk to teams and say, how do you see this guy? And they'll be like, well, we don't draft tackles that have this threshold, or we don't care. We think he has the feet to play.
Right, so they'll cross guys off.
Like Armand Membu is the perfect example from Missouri. I think he's the best tackle in the draft. He played right tackle for them, and he's 6'3", and everybody looks at him like he's not built like a tackle. He's a little bit more compact. I think he has the best feet in the class. So if you have the feet to make up the ground where you'd want the arm length, this was the Rashawn Slater argument from Northwestern. Everybody was like, oh, Rashawn Slater, he has short arms. Can he play tackle? Well, do you watch his lower half? Like, the base is so explosive. If you put
he'll get to where he needed to be.
You get to where you need to go anyway rather than reaching.
Right.
So there's so much context needed for things like that. But I think Membu, he absolutely has it. That conversation will be fascinating around, like, Kelvin Banks Jr., who was a great tackle at Texas. Some people think he's a guard. Wyatt Milam from West Virginia is going to play guard because he's just very sawed-off, very short arms, and that's a fine transition for him. So Jonas Savaiinaea from Arizona, like, he's built like a guard, but he played tackle.
Yeah.
There's so many examples like this, and it really is a team-by-team case.
Of what they're willing
Yeah.
to go for.
A lot of teams, when they draft one high, they're like, let's see if he fit. Let him fail at tackle, and if he does, we'll move him inside.
It's a great backup plan.
Right. What's wrong with that?
So, are there any, like, guys that we haven't hit on that are, like, underrated maybe that you love?
Yeah.
Like, guys that you just, like, fell in love with watching their tape?
I have a deep cut for you. Jacob Parrish from Kansas State, the corner. 5'9" corner. If he was 6 feet tall, he'd be in everyone's first round of the mock drafts. Great athlete. I believe he was a high school sprinting champion. So this is a good place for him.
Yeah, all the guys with track backgrounds. I'm
Yep.
like, all right, like, let's highlight them when they.
Yeah, you're gonna have a good
drills.
weekend.
Yeah.
But I just think he's so sticky in coverage, and he's one of those guys that he's smaller, but when you're the best athlete at your school, like, you're gonna play on the outside. It's almost like when somebody plays shortstop in baseball, and then you get to the major leagues. You're a second baseman now, or like you're gonna go to the outfield. He's somebody that'll probably kick into nickel at the next level, and nickel is base defense of the NFL. So I love when people are like, well, he's only a nickel. Oh, he's only a nickel.
He'll be
so
out
he's
there
always
all
on the
the
field?
time. Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
are we at that point yet? So Parrish is an amazing player. I just think he's so sticky in coverage. He matches every single movement. He's really explosive. He's very feisty around the football. I thought he was physical enough against the run. That's a problem with this corner class. A lot of these corners don't show up in the run game the way you'd hope. And you don't have to be a superstar against the run at corner, but you got to compete, and you got to be at least average. So that'll be a growth spot for some of them. You look at how deep this running back class is. I mean, I think, obviously, not to say like these guys are sleepers, but like DJ Giddens is another one, from that program who's just so explosive with his cuts, really, really hard to tackle in the open field. You look at the wide receiver group. I brought up Jack Besh earlier. He's not a sleeper anymore because he blew up the Senior Bowl. And he catches everything. He's really smart with his routes. He's 220 pounds because he used to play tight end, so he's a great blocker. But he went from somebody that nobody was talking about in the top 10 wide receivers, where I think he's a round 2 pick now. And that's a big jump for someone like that. So, yeah, this class has a lot of gems, and usually people kind of, figure it out after the combine because they test like an NFL athlete here.
Right, it's harder to hide or sneak up on somebody.
You can't hide anyone at the combine.
So before we let you go, Connor, like, you mentioned so many different things that you're looking at. Obviously, you're here to talk to a bunch of people related to all of these teams and scouts and figure out what they're thinking. What do you look forward to the most with this week? Like, what are you most excited for? Because we're recording this at the start of the combine.
The number one thing for me is the players that we get to talk to, which is a really unique part of this event, just sitting down one-on-one and getting to know them as people and what they love about the game, what they love away from the game. The number 2 thing for me when I go home, when you're inputting all the data, like I've watched this class since last June. You get a baseline in summer. You try to watch 12 to 15 guys at every position group if you can, and you rank them, and then you get to input all the data almost a year later, and you look for the trends, like the 3-cone for edge rushers, obviously the 40 time for wide receivers, so the agilities, things like that, the vertical jump for pass rushers, and their 10-yard split, how you get off the ball, how quickly you are dictating
That would
the
be
rep.
my worst one.
Yes, it's not an easy one for us media people, I'll tell you that. Not a lot of acceleration around here.
No. Maybe eventually, like once you get going, you can like keep it going.
The start's not great. The
No.
build-up speed is what reporters do.
Yeah, chasing somebody down a hallway here.
Right. You're inputting all the data and trying to see what it matches up with what you've watched for 8 months. And then you're finding trends that you didn't see coming. You go, oh, I have to go watch that guy again. Or I didn't watch this guy. He blew up at the combine. Was the film real? Or is he just a workout warrior? So it's actually like the 3 weeks after the combine that to me are the best part as an evaluator.
I'm also interested, like the playoff went later than it ever did before.
Yeah.
So the Ohio State guys, there's a bunch of them here. Did they train for the combine enough?
Right.
Like
They all had to drop out of the Senior Bowl. It's just too long of a season.
Right. And then you need to start training for these drills, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's very
Brutal.
interesting with
You're-
them
you're-
and the Notre Dame guys.
You're trying to get your legs back under you from the longest season you've ever played in your life. And then you're doing things that
You never do.
are different.
These are very
Right.
specific drills.
Which
yeah.
I think the college programs have gotten better, where that's why you get like Bruce Feldman's freaks list, right? I know
They're training the types of things.
Yes,
that-
like Michigan is running through all these things before these guys are ever draft eligible.
Yeah.
So I think that the elite program guys are a little bit more prepared for it. But there's still guys from smaller programs that, like, I go back home and train with the guy that's been training me since I was 13 years old. While you have some people going to the biggest, like, pro-level training program. So it's really cool to kind of see the difference.
Well, Connor, you are my number one pick. Thank you so
Thank you very
much
much,
for
Nicole.
going through
It was a blast.
all of this. Very excited. You and I are both going to be talking to a lot of
Yeah.
players here in Indianapolis this week. So we will have plenty more content for you on the Rushing the Field feed from the NFL Combine. But thanks to Connor Rogers, I'm Nicole
Thanks, Nicole.
Auerbach, and that's your primer for the Combine.